Dan Reeves slouched over his keyboard, the monotonous tapping of keys the only sound breaking the silence of his suburban New Jersey home. Another day, another tedious bug to fix. At 37, he'd settled into a routine as predictable as the sunrise. He glanced at the clock, 6:30 p.m. Time to take a break and attempt to cook something, however unimpressive. Dan pushed back from his desk, his chair scraping the hardwood floor, and trudged to the kitchen. Opening the fridge, he stared blankly at its sparse contents. Pasta again, he muttered, grabbing a jar of sauce. As he filled a pot with water, a deafening boom shook the house. Dan stumbled, nearly dropping the pot. He rushed to the window, heart pounding. A thick plume of smoke rose from the backyard, obscuring the setting sun. What? Dan bolted outside, coughing as acrid smoke filled his lungs. As the haze cleared, his eyes widened. A sleek, silver object the size of a car sat in a crater where his herb garden used to be. No way, he breathed, inching closer. This can't be real. A sudden hiss of releasing pressure made him jump back. A panel slid open, and a figure emerged. Dan's jaw dropped as he took in the sight. Green skin, large almond-shaped eyes, and a slender figure that was unmistakably female. The alien blinked at him before breaking into a dazzling smile. "Oh, hello there. I hope I didn't cause too much trouble with my landing," she said cheerfully. Dan could barely speak. You're an alien?" "Yes, I suppose that's what you'd call me," she giggled, her voice oddly musical. "I'm Zira. And you?" "Dan. Dan Reeves." "Wonderful to meet you, Dan Reeves." Zira clapped her hands together. "I do apologize for the abrupt entrance. This was meant to be an observational mission, but I got a bit carried away with the controls." Dan ran a hand through his hair, still struggling to process the situation. "Observational mission?" "Oh, yes." Zira's eyes sparkled with excitement. "I'm part of an intergalactic exchange program. We study developing civilizations to better understand the universe's evolution. Earth seemed like such an interesting little planet, so I volunteered." Dan frowned at her words. "Developing? We've got smartphones and space stations, you know." Zira patted his arm in a consoling way. "Of course, and they're very impressive for your level of advancement." Dan opened his mouth to argue, but realized the absurdity of the situation. He was standing in his backyard, debating technological superiority with an alien. He burst out laughing, the tension draining from him. "This is crazy," he wheezed between chuckles. "I must be dreaming." Zira tilted her head with a mischievous glint in her eye. "Shall I pinch you to prove otherwise?" Dan's laughter faded as the reality of an alien ship in his backyard sank in. "Wait, we need to hide you. If anyone sees..." "Oh, no need to worry about that." Zira waved dismissively. "My ship's cloaking device will activate soon. No one will even know it's here." As if on cue, the spacecraft shimmered and vanished, leaving only the crater behind. "Done blinked." "That's convenient. But what about you? You can't just wander around here looking like that." Zira's form rippled, her green skin shifting to a more human tone, her features subtly altering to appear less alien. "How's this?" she asked. "It's basic camouflage, but it should work for brief interactions." Dan stared in awe at the transformation. "That's actually pretty impressive." Zira beamed. "Thank you. Now, about my accommodations." "Wait, you're what?" "Well, I can't sleep in my ship, can I? And I would love to experience authentic Earth living." Dan rubbed his face, overwhelmed. "You want to stay with me? If it's not too much trouble." Zira nodded eagerly. "I'm an excellent house guest, I promise." Dan weighed his options. He could send her away. But then what? Let an alien roam the world unsupervised? "Fine," he sighed. "I've got a spare room, but we need a cover story. How about you're a foreign exchange student?" Zira clapped her hands again. "Oh, how exciting. I've always wanted to be a student. What shall I study?" Anthropology?" Dan suggested, figuring it was close enough to the truth. "Perfect. Now, Dan Reeves, show me around your quaint little dwelling." Over the next few days, Dan found himself playing the role of reluctant tour guide and cultural interpreter. Zira's curiosity seemed endless, and her questions left him scrambling for explanations. Dan, why do humans wrap themselves in cloth cocoons before sleeping? Is it part of a metamorphosis process? Zira asked one morning, emerging from her room draped in her bedsheet. Dan choked on his coffee. What? No. Those are just blankets for warmth and comfort. Her brow furrowed. But your internal temperature regulation should suffice. Unless it's a mating ritual? A way to entice partners with mystery? Dan's face turned crimson. No. It's just, can you please put on some clothes? Zira sighed dramatically, but complied. Your species has so many rules about body coverings. Later that day, Dan took her grocery shopping, hoping for a simple, uneventful errand. He should have known better. Dan, look at this fascinating object, Zira exclaimed, holding up a banana. Is it a communication device? The shape seems ideal for grasping. Nearby shoppers turned to stare. Dan quickly pulled her aside, whispering, It's a fruit. You eat it. Zira's eyes widened. You put this phallic object in your mouth? How delightfully scandalous. Dan groaned, aware of the judgmental looks they were receiving. It's not. Let's just finish shopping without turning everything into a biology lesson, okay? As they drove home, Zira's questions continued. Dan, I noticed many products in the store are for enhancing appearance. Do humans choose mates based on visual stimuli? Dan gripped the steering wheel. It's complicated. Looks matter, but there's more to it than that. Fascinating, she mused. And how does one initiate mating? Is there a specific ritual or display of prowess? Dan almost swerved. Can we talk about something else? Please. That evening, as Dan worked on his laptop, Zira peered over his shoulder. What's this app with all the human faces? Dan quickly minimized the dating app. Nothing. Just a social networking thing. Her eyes sparkled with interest. Is this how humans find mates? Dan sighed, realizing there was no escaping her questions. Yeah, it's a dating app. People use it to meet others they're interested in. How efficient, Zira exclaimed. So, you just select a partner based on their profile? It's not that simple, Dan replied. You talk, get to know them, go on a date. Zira leaned in, fascinated. A date? Is that to assess compatibility? Dan rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of explaining human emotions and relationships to an alien. Something like that. As the night wore on, Dan couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just become infinitely more complicated. The next morning, Dan woke up with a pounding headache, the remnants of yesterday's bizarre encounters swirling in his mind. He groaned and rubbed his eyes, glancing at the clock. It was 7 a.m. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. He shuffled to the bathroom, splashed some water on his face, and braced himself for another day with Zira. When he entered the kitchen, he was greeted by an unexpected sight. Zira was flipping pancakes, the smell wafting through the air. She was humming a strange, melodic tune, and her green skin seemed to glow under the morning light. Good morning, Dan, she chirped, turning to face him with a bright smile. I hope you like pancakes. I modified the recipe based on your earthling food preferences. Dan blinked, caught off guard by her enthusiasm. Good morning. I do like pancakes, but how did you? He trailed off, remembering that she had a vast array of knowledge at her disposal. It was still surreal. I just observed you doing it yesterday, she said proudly, flipping another pancake with a skill that seemed almost innate. It's not very difficult. I do hope I got the proportions right. Dan chuckled, the morning light warming his mood a bit. It looks great, Zira. Really. He took a seat at the kitchen table, watching her as she bustled around, adding fresh berries to a serving platter. So, any plans for today? I wish to explore more of your quaint human customs, she said, placing a stack of pancakes in front of him. Today, I would like to learn about your work environment. What exactly is it you do for productivity? Dan took a bite of the pancake, surprised at how good it was. These are amazing, he said through a mouthful. As for my work, it's, pretty boring. I mostly fix computer bugs and write code for websites. Fascinating. So, you essentially communicate with your machines to make them behave correctly? Zira asked, tilting her head in a way that reminded him of a curious puppy. Something like that, he said, wiping syrup from his chin. I spent a lot of time behind a screen, making sure everything runs smoothly. Zira's eyes widened. So, you spend the majority of your time not interacting with other humans? Is this typical for your species? Dan nodded, his enthusiasm waning. Yeah, a lot of people work from home now. It's more efficient, I guess, but it can get pretty lonely. Her expression softened. That is intriguing. And how do you form your emotional connections in such isolation? Dan sighed, leaning back in his chair. It's complicated, Zira. There are apps for that now, like the one you saw yesterday. But face-to-face interaction is usually more meaningful. Let us not overcomplicate this, Zira exclaimed, clapping her hands. I shall accompany you to your work and observe how you communicate with these machines. Okay, but Dan hesitated, recalling how her curiosity often led to awkward situations. Just try to blend in, all right? No alien questions about mating rituals in the middle of a Zoom call. Zira nodded eagerly. Understood. I shall be your most inconspicuous shadow. After breakfast, Dan grabbed his laptop and set up a makeshift workspace at the dining table. Zira perched beside him, her large eyes scanning his screen as he logged into his work platform. Fascinating, she exclaimed as a video call popped up on the screen, revealing his colleague Mia. You have a method of visually connecting with your co-humans. Yeah, this is called a video conference, Dan explained. Try to keep it simple. We use it to communicate when we can't be in the same place. Mia greeted him cheerfully, her bright smile lighting up the screen. Hey Dan, who's your friend? This is Zira, he introduced, feeling a wave of anxiety wash over him. She's visiting from another country. Nice to meet you, Zira, Mia said with genuine warmth. So, what brings you here? Zira leaned forward, her curiosity palpable. I'm here to learn about Earth's culture, specifically its complex social interactions and how humans form emotional bonds. Dan pinched the bridge of his nose, wishing he could take back those words. Mia's eyes widened with interest. Wow, that's so cool. You'll have to tell us all about it. Yes, I intend to document my observations, Zira said, her voice filled with enthusiasm. For example, why do humans require so much clothing while engaging in these social rituals? Mia burst out laughing, her amusement echoing through the speakers. It's just how we do things, Zira. You'll get used to it. Dan felt his face heat up. Okay, can we keep the conversation focused on work? He tried to steer the discussion back on track, but Zira's inquiries persisted. What are the parameters for your emotional connections? Do you exchange physical contact during these rituals? She pressed, ignoring Dan's plea. Mia raised an eyebrow, glancing at Dan, who was silently pleading for the conversation to shift. Well, yes, sometimes. It varies from person to person, she said cautiously, clearly enjoying Dan's discomfort. Interesting. So, do you consider physical contact essential for establishing an emotional bond? Zira asked innocently, her eyes shimmering with curiosity. Dan felt a lump forming in his throat. Zira, maybe we can talk about this later, he interjected, desperate to regain control of the situation. Mia's eyes sparkled with mischief. Come on, let her ask whatever she wants. This is way more entertaining than our usual meetings. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of awkward questions and laughter, with Zira earning herself a reputation as the most inquisitive guest ever. By the time it wrapped up, Dan felt utterly drained. After Mia signed off, Dan turned to Zira, who was practically glowing with excitement. That was so engaging. Your work is thrilling, Dan. Yeah, thrilling, he muttered, rubbing his temples. I'm glad you enjoyed it, but maybe tone it down next time? People aren't used to talking about that stuff. Zira tilted her head thoughtfully. I apologize if I made you uncomfortable. My intent is purely educational. Yeah, I get it, Dan said, trying to shake off his frustration. It's just hard to explain things like emotions to someone who views them as purely analytical. I understand, Zira replied softly. But isn't that the beauty of your human experience? The complexity and messiness of emotions. Dan was silent for a moment, considering her words. Yeah, I guess. It can be beautiful, but it can also be complicated and overwhelming. Zira nodded, her expression sincere. Perhaps that is why I am here. to learn and understand how your species navigates these challenges. Dan felt a weight lift slightly as he recognized her genuine curiosity. All right, I'll try to help you understand. But let's take it slow. Agreed. Zira smiled brightly. Now, what shall we explore next? Your world has so much to offer. As he pondered their next adventure, Dan couldn't shake the feeling that, despite the absurdity of it all, maybe having Zira around could help him see his own world through a different lens. Perhaps there was something more to this intergalactic exchange than he had initially thought. After all, he might just learn something about himself along the way. The next morning dawned with a golden hue filtering through the kitchen window. Dan found himself still processing the whirlwind of emotions and revelations from the previous day. Zira's presence was undeniably intriguing, and he couldn't help but feel that having an alien in his home could be a unique opportunity, if only he could manage the eccentricities. "Good morning, Dan?" Zira greeted, her voice bright as she set down a bowl of fresh fruit on the table, the colors vivid against the plain wood. "I took the liberty of preparing a fruit salad. I believe you call this to breakfast." Dan rubbed his eyes and sat down, still feeling a bit groggy. "Morning, Zira. That looks amazing." "Thanks." Zira watched him intently as he dug into the salad, her eyes shimmering with curiosity. "Is this a customary human breakfast? I find the variety of colors and textures most appealing." "It's a popular choice for those who want something light and healthy in the morning," he replied, chewing thoughtfully. "So, what do you want to do today?" "I wish to learn more about your social customs," she replied, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Perhaps we could visit a public gathering of your species? It would be an excellent opportunity for observation." "Public gathering?" Dan hesitated, remembering how Zira's curiosity often led to awkward moments. I guess we could go to the local farmer's market. It's bustling with people, and you can see how they interact." "Excellent idea. I would like to see this market you speak of." Zira clapped her hands, her excitement infectious. After breakfast, they dressed for the day. Zira had chosen an outfit that Dan could only describe as a vibrant blend of colors that somehow managed to look both alien and stylishly human. He opted for a casual t-shirt and jeans, trying to blend in with the usual Sunday crowd. As they arrived at the farmer's market, Dan felt a mix of anticipation and trepidation. The atmosphere was alive with the sounds of vendors hawking their wares and families chatting as they strolled through the aisles. He hoped Zira would be on her best behavior. "Wow, it's so lively!" Zira exclaimed, her eyes wide with wonder. "Look at all the diverse life forms." She pointed at a group of children running by, their laughter infectious. "Yeah, it's pretty great," Dan replied, a smile tugging at his lips as he observed her reactions. "Let's start over there." He gestured toward a stall overflowing with fresh fruits and vegetables. As they approached, the vendor greeted them with a warm smile. "Good morning. Looking for anything special today?" Zira leaned forward, peering at the various fruits. "What is this fascinating orb?" She pointed at a pomegranate, her voice filled with genuine curiosity. "That's a pomegranate," Dan said, trying to suppress a chuckle. "It's delicious, but a bit messy to eat." Zira picked it up and turned it over in her hands, intrigued by its texture. "What is the purpose of this fruit?" "It's a snack, and people also use it in salads or juices," Dan explained. "But it's best to eat it fresh." "I wish to try it," Zira said excitedly. "What is the ritual for consuming this food item?" The vendor, amused by Zira's enthusiasm, offered a sample. "Here, let me show you." He carefully cut the pomegranate in half and handed Zira a piece. Zira inspected it closely before bringing it to her mouth, cautiously biting into the seeds. Her eyes widened with delight. "It's exquisite. The burst of flavor is unlike anything I've ever encountered." Dan laughed, his anxiety easing. "Glad you like it. Want to buy some?" "Yes, please." Zira beamed, and Dan handed the vendor some cash, feeling a sense of pride as Zira eagerly stuffed the pomegranate into her tote bag. As they continued through the market, Zira's excitement was infectious. She asked questions about everything, from the flowers to the baked goods, sometimes leading to amusing misunderstandings. At one point, she held up a loaf of sourdough bread and asked, "Is this a living organism?" "It has a crust," No, that's just how it looks, Dan explained, chuckling. It's baked bread, and it's very delicious, by the way. The day flew by as they explored the market. Dan felt lighter, his earlier apprehensions fading away as Zira's enthusiasm brought a new perspective to the mundane. Dan, I must say, I am utterly fascinated by your species' social structures, Zira said as they sat on a bench, taking a break with snacks in hand. The way you communicate with one another is extraordinary. Thanks, but it's not all that remarkable, he replied, his cheeks flushed with pride. We just talk and connect. It's natural. Natural? Zira raised an eyebrow, clearly confused. But why do you seem so uncomfortable? There is much joy in this gathering. Dan sighed, glancing around at the bustling crowd. It can be overwhelming. People have expectations, social norms. It's not always easy to navigate. Zira tilted her head, considering his words. But why allow the expectations of others to dictate your experience? Why not embrace the spontaneity? Dan chuckled, shaking his head. It's easier said than done. We've built up a lot of layers of complexity over time. Sometimes it's hard to strip those away. Zira nodded thoughtfully. Then her expression brightened. Then we shall do an experiment. Let us engage with those around us. I want to observe your species in their natural state. Engage? Dan hesitate. You mean like talk to people? Yes. Let us embrace spontaneity, she urged, her enthusiasm almost contagious. Come, let us see how many new connections we can form in this gathering. Dan looked at her, realizing that her fearless curiosity was somehow both exhilarating and terrifying. All right, but let's start small. They rose from the bench and wandered toward a nearby group of people enjoying music. Zira spotted a couple of teenagers setting up a small performance with guitars and drums. Shall we inquire about this musical expression? Dan nodded, sensing that the day was about to get even more interesting. Sure, let's go. As they approached, Zira greeted the group with an energy that drew them in. Greetings, fellow beings. I am Zira, and I wish to learn about your fascinating musical expressions. The teens looked at each other, a mix of confusion and amusement on their faces. One of them, a girl with brightly dyed hair, laughed. Hey, I'm Jess. We're about to play some songs if you want to join. Zira's eyes sparkled. Yes, I would love to participate. What is the purpose of this ritual? Dan cringed slightly, glancing at Jess, who seemed to be both entertained and bewildered. It's just for fun. We play music, hang out, and enjoy each other's company. Zira's smile widened. So it is a form of connection through sound. How wonderful! As the music started, Zira swayed to the rhythm, completely lost in the moment. Dan watched, amazed at how she effortlessly drew others into her orbit. People began to gather around, intrigued by the green-skinned girl who seemed so different yet so vibrant. Feeling the energy shift, Dan decided to join in. He started to clap along with the beat, smiling at the unexpected joy filling the air. The casual atmosphere reminded him of what he had been missing: genuine connections, laughter, and shared experiences. After the performance, Zira turned to Dan, her eyes gleaming with excitement. Did you see how they engaged with us? It was exhilarating. Yeah, Dan admitted, feeling a warmth spread through him. It was fun. Thanks for encouraging me to step out of my comfort zone. Then we shall do this more often, Zira declared, clapping her hands. Imagine all the knowledge we can gather through spontaneous interactions. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting a warm glow over the market, Dan felt a shift within himself. Zira's fearless curiosity had opened his eyes to the joy of connection. Maybe, just maybe, this unexpected partnership was exactly what he needed to embrace the chaos of life and rediscover the beauty of human relationships. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of hope. Hope that perhaps understanding could blossom between them, transcending the boundaries of their worlds. The following week unfolded with a whirlwind of activity, each day more unpredictable than the last. Dan found himself navigating his new role as both host and guide to Zira, whose insatiable curiosity had a knack for turning mundane moments into extraordinary adventures. One afternoon, Dan returned home from work to find Zira sprawled on the living room floor, surrounded by various books and magazines he hadn't realized he owned. She was poring over a brightly colored magazine titled The Science of Fashion. "Dan, come look," Zira exclaimed, her voice laced with excitement. "This article discusses the significance of fabric choices in your culture. It's absolutely riveting." He chuckled, setting down his bag. "You really are diving headfirst into human culture, huh?" Zira looked up, her large eyes gleaming with enthusiasm. "I want to understand everything. The more I learn about your world, the better I can blend in." Dan sat down beside her, curious about her newfound obsession. "What have you learned so far?" She flipped through the pages, pointing at various images. "This fashion appears to be a method of expressing individuality. Some people choose bright colors, while others opt for more muted tones. Is it a reflection of their emotional states?" "Sort of," Dan replied, nodding thoughtfully. "Fashion can be an extension of who you are or how you feel, but it also carries social implications like trends and group identities." Zira pondered this, tapping her chin. "So, is there a societal structure around this? Are there fashion leaders, perhaps?" "Yeah, there are definitely influencers and trends," Dan admitted. "But most people just wear what they like or what feels comfortable." Zira's eyes lit up. "Then let's have a fashion experiment. I want to create an outfit that reflects my understanding of human emotions." Dan couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. "All right, but where do we start?" Zira leaped to her feet. "The local thrift store? We can find unique pieces that embody your species' concepts of identity." A thrill of excitement coursed through Dan. "That could be fun. Let's go." As they arrived at the thrift store, Dan watched Zira take in her surroundings, her green skin almost glowing under the store's fluorescent lights. She dashed toward a rack of clothes, her eyes wide with wonder. "Look at all these varied textures and colors," she exclaimed, holding up a sparkly sequin top. "Does this communicate joy?" "Done low good." "Definitely, but it's also really bold. Not everyone would wear something like that." Zira pondered for a moment before tossing it back onto the rack. "I shall keep looking for something that embodies the essence of humanity." They spent the next hour rummaging through clothes, with Zira eagerly holding up various items and asking questions. Dan enjoyed her infectious enthusiasm, even as he had to explain what some pieces were for, like the significance of a flannel shirt or why a pair of jeans had become a staple in many wardrobes. Eventually, Zira emerged from a changing room, wearing a long, flowing dress that seemed to capture the light perfectly. "What do you think?" she asked, twirling around. Dan was momentarily speechless. The dress, with its vibrant colors and intricate patterns, seemed to enhance Zira's alien beauty, making her look like a figure straight out of a dream. "It's stunning," he finally managed to say, a warmth spreading through his chest. "You look incredible." Zira beamed at his compliment, and he noticed a soft flush of green on her cheeks. "I feel it captures a sense of freedom and grace. I think I shall take it." After paying for the dress, they headed back to his house, excitement buzzing in the air. Zira couldn't contain her anticipation as she rummaged through her own clothes, planning to put together the ultimate outfit for their fashion show. "Dan, you must help me accessorize," Zira called from her room. "I want to enhance the emotional resonance of my outfit." "Sure, let's see what we can come up with," he replied, amused. As he sifted through a box of old accessories he had accumulated over the years, Dan found a beaded necklace that had once belonged to his grandmother. It shimmered with hues of blue and green, catching the light in a way that reminded him of Zira's skin. "Zira, how about this?" he said, holding it up. Zira examined it closely, her eyes sparkling with admiration. "It is beautiful. It reflects the essence of the ocean. Perfect for my outfit." "All right, let's put this together," Dan said, feeling a sense of excitement build as he helped her assemble the final look. With Zira dressed to impress, they stood in front of a mirror, admiring the reflection. The vibrant dress flowed elegantly around her, the necklace adding a touch of sophistication. She looked radiant and ready to conquer the world. "Now, we need a runway," Zira declared, clapping her hands. Let's have our fashion show right here in your living room. Dan laughed, but he found himself getting swept up in her enthusiasm. All right, but we have to have some music to set the mood. He quickly found a playlist on his phone and set it to play. As the music filled the room, Zira struck a pose, her arms outstretched as if welcoming an audience. Dan couldn't help but laugh as she pranced down an imaginary runway, her movements exaggerated and playful. This is delightful, Zira exclaimed, her laughter ringing like a melody. I feel the energy of the audience. Dan couldn't remember the last time he had laughed so freely. As Zira modeled her outfit, he found himself enjoying the moment, forgetting about the stress of work or the mundane tasks that awaited him. When she finished her final walk, Zira took a dramatic bow. Thank you, thank you. I shall now accept questions about the emotional significance of my ensemble. Dan wiped tears of laughter from his eyes. All right, first question. How do you feel wearing it? Zira considered this for a moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. I feel powerful, like I am embracing all the emotions of humanity at once. That's a great answer. Dan applaudit. You nailed it. Your turn. Zira grinned. What about you, Dan? What do your clothes say about you? He paused, caught off guard by her question. I guess they say I'm laid back? I usually go for comfort over style. Zira nodded thoughtfully. A sound approach. Comfort is essential, but perhaps you could also experiment with bolder choices. Maybe, he replied, contemplating her words. But I'm not sure I'm ready to strut around in sequins like you. Zira giggled. There is power in expressing oneself. I shall help you discover your inner fashionista. Dan rolled his eyes, a grin spreading across his face. I think I'll stick with the basics for now, thanks. Their playful banter continued, and as the night wore on, Dan felt a warmth in his heart. Zira had brought a lightness into his life that he hadn't realized he was missing. As they settled down on the couch, exhausted from their impromptu fashion show, Zira turned to him, her expression turning serious. Dan, thank you for sharing this experience with me. I feel like I am beginning to understand more about your world. Dan smiled, feeling a swell of pride. I'm glad to help. You're making me see things differently, too. I believe this is what connection feels like, Zira said softly, her gaze locking with his. A sharing of experiences, emotions, it is quite beautiful. He held her gaze, feeling the weight of her words. Something unspoken passed between them, a moment charged with potential. But before he could respond, Zira suddenly stood up, her excitement returning. Shall we plan our next adventure? She asked, her eyes alight with possibility. Dan laughed, standing up as well. Sure. What do you have in mind? Perhaps we can explore your hiking culture? I wish to experience the natural landscape of your world firsthand. Hiking up? That could be a great idea, he replied, feeling a rush of anticipation. There's a beautiful trail not too far from here. Then let us prepare for our next great exploration, Zira exclaimed, clapping her hands together. As they began to plan their outing, Dan couldn't shake the feeling that, in this whirlwind of unpredictability, he was finding something he never knew he needed. Each new experience with Zira felt like a step into uncharted territory, a journey into both their worlds, one that was bound to reshape their understanding of each other and the connections they forged along the way.